Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we're going to be diving back into the works of Mrs. Helena Blavatsky. This is the secret doctrine we are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but some people find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of the secret doctrine with gods, monads, and atoms. Some years ago, we remarked, footnote 1, the septenary principle, article in 5 Years of Theosophy. Some years ago, we remarked that the esoteric doctrine may well be called the thread doctrine, since, like Sutratman in the Vedanta philosophy, footnote 2, the Atman, or spirit, the spiritual self, passing like a thread through the 5 subtle bodies, or principles, koshas, is called thread soul, or Satrutman in Vedantic philosophy. In the Vedanta philosophy, it passes through and strings together all the ancient philosophical religious systems and reconciles and explains them all. We say now it does more. It not only reconciles the various and apparently conflicting systems, but it checks the discoveries of modern exact science and shows some of them to be necessarily correct, since they are found corroborated in the ancient records. All this will, no doubt, be regarded as terribly impertinent and disrespectful, a veritable crime of laissez-science. Nevertheless, it is a fact. Science is, undeniably, ultra-materialistic in our days, but it finds, in one sense, its justification. Nature, behaving in Act 2, never esoterically, and being, as the Kabbalists say, in abscontio, can only be judged by the profane through her appearance, and that appearance is always deceitful on the physical plane. This is apologetics, and I'm not here for that. Right? I don't accept apologetics when it comes from the Bible, and I'm not going to accept it when it's talking about science or spirituality. Right? There are things that cannot be proven in spirituality. We talk about that all of the time. The realm of speculation is perfectly fine. I speculate that there is a God. I emphatically believe for myself that there is a God, but on the level of evidentiary, there's none, right? There's no way to prove God. You can speculate, you can give all kinds of theoretical proofs, but there's no actual concrete evidence that there is a creator. I fully believe that there is, but it's in the realm of speculation. Right? This is I believe this thing, so I see the evidence of it. That's what's happening here. Right? Nature behaves in Act 2, never esoterically, and being, as the Kabbalists say, in abscontio, which means not present, right? Not in evidence. And so this is just taking what you want to believe and allowing it to shape your belief. On the other hand, the naturalists refuse to blend physics with metaphysics, the body with its informing soul and spirit, which they prefer ignoring. This is a matter of choice with some, while the minority strive very sensibly to enlarge the domain of physical science by trespassing on the forbidden grounds of metaphysics, so distasteful to some materialists. These scientists are wise in their generation, for all their wonderful discoveries would go for nothing and remain forever headless bodies, unless they lift the veil of matter and strain their eyes to see beyond. Now that they have studied nature in the length, breadth, and thickness of her physical frame, it is time to remove the skeleton to the second plane and search within the unknown depths for the living and real entity, for its substance, the noumenon of evanescent matter. It is only by acting on such lines that some of the truths, now called exploded superstitions, will be discovered to be facts and relics of ancient knowledge and wisdom. One of such degrading beliefs, in the opinion of the all-denying skeptic, is found in the idea that cosmos, besides its objective planetary inhabitants, its humanities in other inhabited worlds, is full of invisible, intelligent existences. These so-called archangels, angels and spirits of the West, copies of their prototypes, the Dayan Kohans, the Devas, and the Pitras of the East, are no real beings, but fictions. On this point, materialistic science is inexorable. To support this position, it upsets its own axiomatic law of uniformity in the laws of nature, that of continuity, and all the logical sequence of analogies in the evolution of being. The masses of the profane are asked and made to believe that the accumulated testimony of history, which shows even the atheists of old, such as Epicurus and Democritus, believing in gods, was false, and that philosophers like Socrates and Plato, asserting their existence, were mistaken enthusiasts and fools. If we hold our opinions merely on historical grounds, on the authority of legions of the most eminent sages, Neoplatonist mystics of all ages, from Pythagoras down to the eminent scientists and professors of the present century, who, if they reject gods, believe in spirits, shall we consider the authorities as weak-minded and foolish as any Roman Catholic peasant who believes in and prays to his once human saint, or the archangel, Saint Michael? But there is no difference between the belief of the peasant and that of the Western heirs of the Rosicrucians and alchemists of the Middle Ages. Is it the Van Helmots, the Kunraths, the Paracelsus and Agrippas, from Roger Bacon down to Saint Germain, who were all blind enthusiasts, hysterics, or cheats? Or is it the handful of modern skeptics, the leaders of thought, who were struck with the necessity of negation? The latter, we opine. It would be a miracle indeed, quite an abnormal fact in the realm of probabilities and logic, were that handful of negators to be the sole custodians of truth, while the million-strong host of believers in gods, angels, and spirits, in Europe and America alone, namely Greek and Latin Christians, Theosophists, spiritualists, mystics, etc., etc., should be no better than deluded fanatics and hallucinated mediums, and often no higher than the victims of deceivers and impostors. It is without doubt that there are a large number of deceivers and impostors in it. Right? One of my problems with entering the spiritual community is that it is fucking saturated with people who not only don't know what they are talking about, but are enthusiastically wrong. People who read tarot with no understanding whatsoever of any of it. People who believe that the crystals can do anything by themselves. People who believe that there is some entity holding the moon and making it face the plane of the earth. Right? There are people who are completely unintelligent, who flock to spirituality simply because it is an opposite to Christianity or the organized control systems. And that's annoying to me, right? It is beyond annoying to me to have to deal with some of the people who are in the field that I am entering, right? I am definitely entering this field, but I am not like most of them, right? I am definitely not on the same level as most of these people who don't even believe in what they're doing, right? They're here to sell you a show. I'm not here to sell you a show. I'm here to tell you things that I know and things that I speculate upon in such a way that we can see if they are reproducible. And if they're not, I am willing to be corrected, right? I believe that anything I can do, you can do better. And there are things that I have done, but it had nothing to do with these crystals being aligned in the proper way. It had nothing to do with drawing the correct sigils or doing a ritual on the correct day of the month underneath the moon in the naked, right? All of those things are unnecessary. They are extras added into, and the people who perform them most often do not understand what they are doing at all. And that is a problem for me. There are some, right? There are some who are in this honestly and openly, right? There are some who are doing this with a full understanding of what they're doing, and there are some who are not. However, varying in their external presentations and dogmas, beliefs in the host of invisible intelligences of various grades have all the same foundation. Truth and error are mixed in all. The exact extent, depth, breadth, and length of the mysteries of nature are to be found only in the Eastern esoteric sciences. There's an assumption. You know what they say about those, right? So vast and so profound are these that hardly a very few, of the highest initiates, those whose very existence is known but to a small number of adepts, is capable of assimilating the knowledge. Yet, it is all there, and one by one, facts and processes in nature's workshops are permitted to find their way into the exact sciences, while mysterious help is given to rare individuals in unraveling its arcana. It is at the close of the great cycles, in connection with racial development, that such events generally take place. Okay, this is an unprovable, right? We don't have any records from the fourth race, much less from the third race, or the second race, or the first race. This is an assumption that you are asserting as fact, right? Well, this seems to be because we're coming to the end of the age here in about 10,000 years, so we have to do something that... It's annoying. It really is. And most of what we have gone through so far has not been to this level, right? But the repeated pattern, right? That's what's really getting under my skin with this, is the repeated pattern of stating this as though it is truth is just annoying me. All right, we are at the very close of the cycle of 5,000 years of the present Aryan Kali Yuga. When? What? Between this time and 1897, there will be a large rent made in the veil of nature, and materialistic science will receive a death blow. Well, Mrs. Blavatsky, you were absolutely fucking wrong. Like, unequivocally, in the 9 years from the time that you wrote this book until 1897, there was no large rent made in the veil of nature. There was no materialistic science receiving a death blow. None. As a matter of fact, I am of the speculative certainty that your 5,000 years is wrong. 6,000. 6,000 is the half cycle. 12,000 is the long cycle. If you would have said 6,000, I would be more inclined to believe you for a variety of reasons, right? The 12,000 year disaster cycle will make it again today. There are scientific reasons to believe in the 12,000 year disaster cycle. There are historical reasons to believe in the 12,000 year disaster cycle. There are accounts recorded in history, just one, but it's there, that this disaster cycle happens. It is something that we can find scientific evidence that it has happened, even if science, registered trademark, won't allow that to be published, right? It is there. And so, you're wrong. Like, there's no other way to put it than that, right? You are speculating, and speculating is fine, but you gave a date. Don't ever give a date, right? No one knows the date or the hour. That's in the book, and I don't even necessarily believe in that book, but that's not the only place that is recorded, right? There is a cycle, and we won't know what day and what hour is going to happen, but there will be definite signs that it is coming. There will be definite signs that we are on the edge, and they will all be visible in the sky, right? We will have signs here, but those signs are iterations of things that already happened. There will be wildfires. Well, there's been fucking wildfires forever. There will be earthquakes. There's been earthquakes forever. There will be disasters and pestilence and flood. All of that happens all of the time. But at some point, we will look up in the sky, and there will be something there that is not supposed to be. And we're going to be like, oh, well, damn, that's going to suck. We're all about to die, and the whole world is going to tremble in fear. That is the abomination that causes desolation. Not some man standing in some building in some desert in the middle of nowhere. That's not what's going to happen. We're going to look up into the sky, and we're going to see this thing that is not supposed to be there, and everybody's going to tremble with fear. The abomination, which is a thing that should not be where it is, that causes desolation, which is trembling in fear. And not just a little bit in this one particular area, but across the entirety of the globe. It will be clearly visible. And until the day that shows up in the sky, all of this is speculation. Without throwing any discredit upon time-honored beliefs in whatever direction, we are forced to draw a marked line between blind faith, evolved by theologies, and knowledge, due to independent researches of long generations of adepts. Between, in short, faith and philosophy. There have been, in all ages, undeniably learned and good men, who, having been reared in sectarian beliefs, died in their crystallized convictions. For Protestants, the Garden of Eden is the primeval point of departure in the drama of humanity, and the solemn tragedy on the summit of Calvary, the prelude to the hoped-for millennium. For Roman Catholics, Satan is at the foundation of cosmos, Christ is in its center, and Antichrist at its apex. For both, the hierarchy of being begins and ends within the narrow frames of their respective theologies. One, self-created personal God and an Empyrean ringing with the hallelujahs of created angels. The rest, false gods, Satan, and fiends. Theophilosophy proceeds on broader lines. From the beginning of eons, in time and space in our round and globe, the mysteries of nature, at any rate those which it is lawful for our races to know, were recorded by the pupils of those same now invisible heavenly men in geometrical figures and symbols. The keys thereto passed from one generation of wise men to the other, until they were lost in the antiquity of time because somebody died unseemly, right? That is what literally happened to most of the mysteries. The one person who was holding the keys died of an unfortunate accident, and then the keys did not get to passed on. That's what happened, right? These generations are not uninterrupted. That is what we have discovered through these studies, right? The best approximation is that the Rosicrucians was in the 1600s, maybe the late 1500s, but probably well into the 1600s. That is not really antiquity, right? That is old. That is history. To us, it is ancient, but to them, Pythagoras was ancient. That was, 3,000 years prior to that. And all of the knowledge from Pythagoras, other than that there was a club and that they believed in math, gone. Nobody has it. Nobody has recorded that. The Masons were built off of the Rosicrucians, not off of anything in Egypt. That is a fallacy that they operate under, that they got this from Egypt. There is no proof of that. There is no proof of that. And I say that emphatically because we have gone through works by Masons, and they said that. They said that they don't have the records. They said that it started late. Not me. There's an interruption for at least several generations between a few of the clubs. Back to the text. Some of the symbols, thus passed from the east to west, were brought therefore by Pythagoras, who was not the inventor of his famous triangle. The latter figure, along with the plane, cube, and circle, are more eloquent and scientific descriptions of the order of the evolution of the universe, spiritual and psychic, as well as physical, than volumes of descriptive cosmogonies and revealed genesis. The 10 points inscribed within that Pythagorean triangle are worth all of the theogonies and angelologies ever emanated from the theological brain. For he who interprets them on their very face and in the order given will find in these 17 points, these 7 mathematical points hidden, the uninterrupted series of the genealogies from the first heavenly to terrestrial man. All right, let's look at this. So, you have a triangle, right? Bingo, bango, bongo, 3 points lined up with a line drawn between the points. It is math, right? And then we have extra. We have, let's see if we can get it on the board here. We have a triangle. 1 point, 2 point, 3 points. And then somehow, magically out of nothing, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 maybe. Like, we're just going to pull 10 out of the ass. Maybe we just make it happen. And I understand that there's probably somebody's interpretation of what Pythagoras said, but here's something that you may not know. We have no records of what happened with Pythagoras. There are nothing outside of oral traditions from several generations later which were recorded that we have. We have nothing from Pythagoras himself. And then, if this wasn't enough, you just pulled 10 points out of your ass, right? You just randomly assigned 7 extra points to a triangle. That's not enough for you. Now there have to be 7 more, and they have to be hidden. You can't even find them. I am sure that one of these clubs has an explanation that will fit these hidden points. I don't care. I don't care if your club has come up with a rationalization for this. If it is hidden, it is wrong. Period. The fucking end. Like, that's annoying, right? Like, you've got hidden information. Okay, fine. But you're writing a book, right? And if you're going to brain that there are these points, then those points need to be here. We need to understand exactly where these extra 7 points come from and where the extra 14 points come from, because a triangle has 3 fucking points. And that's coming from somebody like, I literally hold this, right? Where did I put it? Right here. Right, we have these 3 points, and then we have these 3 points, and I assigned 2 more to that. I got 1 in the middle right here, and then I got 1 more all the way around for a grand total of 8 points. But those are explained. This is the origination, and this is the encompassing. And they're not hidden. They're fucking obvious. If you just take the time to understand that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and an origination and a completion. That's where my 7 comes from. That's where I say that this belongs. Or 8. That's where my 8 comes from. If you have a better explanation of this, that's fine. We can talk about that. But I'm not going to try and tell you that there are 14 hidden points inside of this, unless I am willing to walk you through them. That, to me, is how knowledge is spread. That, to me, is how we can understand, okay, this is where it came from. Is that correct or not? That's like the whole Sephiroth with his hidden point. And fuck you. I'm sorry, I try not to cuss in these videos, but man, that is annoying as fuck. And as they give the order of beings, so they reveal the order in which they were evolved. The cosmos, our earth, and the primordial elements by which the latter was generated, begotten in the invisible depths, and in the womb of the same mother as its fellow globes. He who will master the mysteries of our earth will have mastered those of all others. And that's one of those things to make you aspire, right? Well, if you can master the mysteries of our earth, whatever ignorance, pride, or fanaticism may suggest to the contrary, esoteric cosmology can be shown inseparably connected with both philosophy and modern science. The gods of the ancients, the monads, from Pythagoras down to Leibniz, and the atoms of the present materialistic schools, as borrowed by them from the theories of the old Greek atomists, are only a compound unit, or a graduated unity like the human frame, which begins with body and ends with spirit. In the occult sciences, they can be studied separately, but never mastered unless viewed in their mutual correlations during their life cycle and as a universal unity during pralayas. Lepluche shows sincerity, but gives a poor idea of his philosophical capacities when declaring his personal views on the monad, or the mathematical point. A point, he says, is enough to put all the schools in the world in a combustion. But what need has man to know that point, since the creation of such a small being is beyond his power? A fortiori philosophy acts against probability when, from that point which absorbs and disconcerts all her meditations, she presumes to pass on to the generation of the world. Philosophy, however, could never have formed its conception of a logical, universal, and absolute deity if it had no mathematical point within the circle to base its speculations upon. It is only the manifested point, lost to our senses after its pre-genetic appearance in the infinitude and incognizability of the circle, that made a reconciliation between philosophy and theology possible, on condition that the latter should abandon its crude materialistic dogmas. And it is because it has so unwisely rejected the Pythagorean monad and geometrical figures that Christian theology has evolved its self-created human and personal God, the monstrous head from whence flow in two streams the dogmas of salvation and damnation. This is so true that even those clergymen who would be philosophers and who were Masons have, in their arbitrary interpretations, fathered upon the ancient sages the queer idea that the monad represented, with them, the throne of the omnipotent deity placed in the center of the empyrean to indicate TGAOTU, which is a footnote, which means the science of numbers, the great architect of the universe. Okay, read the great architect of the universe. A curious explanation, this, more Masonic than strictly Pythagorean. The point is potential, right? We did logic yesterday, and we were talking about the potential contained. Until there is a beginning, there is only potential contained, right? Here is a way to visualize that. The electric switch in your house goes to your light, right? Until you turn that switch on, there is no current flowing between the switch and the light. But once you open up the light, that potential becomes actual. And so the point represents the potential. It is all things gathered into one before there is anything. Once there is something, it must contain positive and negative. That is one of the laws of creation. And therefore, it becomes the duad. Once you have the duad, it has to go into motion. You have positive and negative. There has to be motion between those. That becomes the triad, right? There's an explanation for all of these numbers along that same line, which makes sense, right? To deny the point as a representative of the potentiality is just doing it wrong, right? The point does represent potentiality just as much as the zero does, right? The zero actually represents it. The one, the point, actually represents awareness of. Zero is the beginning from which all comes, and 8 is the infinity to which all returns. 0 representing infinity and 8 representing infinity in a slightly different way. One's potential, one is finished. And so this understanding, while she is saying it a little bit wrong, is not correct, right? It is the separation from the one into the one, right? From the one into the one. Hopefully that was a little bit clear. Probably not, because I kind of wandered, but I do believe that we are here in a created universe, that we are here specifically to accomplish things, to do, to learn, to grow, sometimes to suffer, but to accomplish these things and to learn and grow from them. All right. Nor did the hierogram within a circle or equilateral triangle ever mean the exemplification of the unity of the divine essence, for this was exemplified by the plane of the boundless circle. What is really meant was the triune, co-equal nature of the first differentiated substance, or the consubstantiality of the manifested spirit, matter, and the universe, their Son, who proceeds from the point, the real esoteric logos, or the Pythagorean monad. For the Greek monos signifies unity in its primary sense. For those unable to seize the difference between the monad, the universal unit, and the monads, or the manifested unity, as also between the ever-hidden and the revealed logos, or the Word, ought never to meddle in philosophy, let alone the esoteric sciences. It is needless to remind the educated reader of Kant's thesis to demonstrate his second antinomy. Well, not all of us had read Kant. See Kant's Critique de la raison pure. Those who have read and understood it will see clearly the line we draw between the absolutely ideal universe and the invisible, though manifested cosmos. Our gods and monads are not the elements of extension itself, but only those of the invisible reality, which is the basis of the manifested cosmos. Neither esoteric philosophy, nor Kant, nor Leibniz would ever admit that extension can be composed of simple or unextended parts. But theologian philosophers will not grasp this. The circle and the point, which latter retires into and merges with the former, after having emanated the first 3 points and connected them with lines, thus forming the first noumenal basis of the second triangle in the manifested world, have ever been an insuperable obstacle to theological flights to dogmatic empyreans. On the authority of this archaic symbol, a male, personal God, the creator and father of all, becomes a third-rate emanation, the Sephiroth, standing forth in descent, and on the left hand of An Sof. See the Kabbalistic tree of life. Hence, the monad is degraded into a vehicle, a throne. The monad, only the emanation and reflection of the point, logos, in the phenomenal world, becomes, as the apex of the manifested equilateral triangle, the father. The left side or the line is the duad, the mother, regarded as the evil counteracting principle. Plutarch, De Placitis Placitorum. The right side represents the son, his mother's husband, in every cosmogony, as one with the apex. At the basic line is the universal plane of productive nature, unifying in the phenomenal plane father, mother, son, as these were unified in the apex, in the supersensuous world. Footnote 2. In the Greek and Latin churches, which regard marriage as one of the sacraments, the officiating priest during the marriage ceremony represents the apex of the triangle. The bride is left feminine side and the bridegroom the right one, while the horizontal line is symbolized by the row of witnesses, bridesmaids, and best men. But behind the priest there is the altar with its mysterious containments and symbolic meaning, inside of which no one but the consecrated priest ought to enter. In the early days of Christianity, the marriage ceremony was a mystery and a true symbol. Now, however, even the churches have lost the true meaning of this symbolism. Or, and this is just a guess, you're inserting something that is not necessarily true. You can take for symbolism things, right? The reason why so many people are deceived by the other side of spirituality we were talking about is because they want an explanation for something. Most people want an explanation for why they're here. They want an explanation. You can find a proof for something that you want, even if it doesn't really exist. I mean, you can find a correlation, but correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation. There are 3 people involved in the marriage ceremony. But that does not mean that it necessarily represents the triad. It does not mean that it ever, at any point, meant that. It can be just a coincidence, unless you are inclined to believe it anyway. Right? If you look at a triangle and in every single instance you see the triad, you will find the triad in everything. I say all of the time, you find what you're looking for, right? If you're looking for racism as the cause of everything, you will find racism as the cause of everything. If you are looking for sexism as the cause of everything, you will find sexism as the cause of everything. You will find what you're looking for. She is looking for a correlation between the marriage ceremony and the greater knowledge. That doesn't mean that it is true. It could simply be the coincidence that you have the two people who are the primary interested parties and the third person who is the representative of authority. That doesn't mean that it necessarily represents the triangle. It just coincidentally only involves three people. We could have created a system by which there were two officials in every marriage, and then it would be four. That would be entirely coincidental as opposed to speaking about the quad. Okay? Correlation and causation are not the same thing. By mystic transmutation, they become quaternary. The triangle became the tetractys. Here we go. Like, that's just what I'm railing against. Like, by mystic transmutation, they went from 3 to 4, even though there is nobody else involved. Right? This transcendental application of geometry to cosmic and divine theogony, the alpha and omega of mystical conception, became dwarfed after Pythagoras by Aristotle. By omitting the point and the circle and taking no account of the apex, he reduced the metaphysical value of the idea and thus limited the doctrine of magnitude to a simple triad. How dare he limit it to the things that are represented? How dare you? The line, the surface, and the body. His modern heirs, who play at idealism, have interpreted these three geometrical figures as space, force, and matter, the potencies of an interacting unity. Footnote 1. See Van Hartman's and Hebert Spencer's works. Materialistic science, perceiving but the basic line of the manifested triangle, the plane of matter, translates it practically as father, matter, mother, matter, and son, matter, as theoretically as matter, force, and correlation. Now, my trinity is the temple, which is the 5D navigation device you are given for 5D space. It is the soul, which is the individualized piece of divinity which makes the decisions for the temple, and the Holy Spirit, which is everything in existence all at the exact same time, myself and you included, and all of the space between us. Every single atom and all of the space contained within and between every single atom is the Holy Spirit. Most of the time it is in potentiality or invisible. You cannot see the molecules floating around you. But if there was an ionization process by which life, heat, and motion were imparted into it, we would see light. See lightning. Materialistic, we did that. But to the average physicist, as remarked by a Kabbalist, space, force, matter are what signs in algebra are to the mathematician, merely conventional symbols. Now, here's the correlation, right? Matter is going to be the temple. Force is going to be the spirit. And space here is going to be represented by your soul. Now, the soul is the deciding factor. Space isn't even really a good way to put it. It's really not. It's more dimension than space, right? You have matter as existent. There is an individualized element. Once you add two elements together, you are creating the space. The force is the part that brings those two elements together. Space, force, and matter are what signs in algebra are to the mathematician. merely conventional symbols, or force as force and matter as matter, are as absolutely unknowable as is the assumed empty space in which they are held to interact. As symbols representing abstractions, the physicist bases reasoned hypotheses on the origin of things and sees three needs in what he terms creation. A place wherein to create. B, a medium by which to create. C, a material from which to create. And in giving a logical expression to this hypothesis through the term space, force, and matter, he believes he has proved the existence of that which each of these represents as he conceives it to be. Footnote 2. New Aspects of Life by Henry Pratt, M.D. The physicist who regards space merely as a representation of our mind, or extension unrelated to things in it, which Locke defined as capable of neither resistance nor motion, the paradoxical materialist who would have a void there, where he can see no matter, would reject with the utmost contempt the proposition that space is a substantial, though apparently an absolutely unknowable, living entity. New Aspects, page 9. Such is, nevertheless, the Kabbalistic teaching, and it is that of the archaic philosophy. Space is the real world, while our world is an artificial one. It is the one unity throughout its infinitude, in its bottomless depths as on its elusive surface. A surface studded with countless phenomenal universes, systems, and mirage-like worlds. Nevertheless, to the Eastern occultist, who is an objective idealist at the bottom, in the real world, which is a unity of forces, there is a connection of all matter in the plenum, as Leibniz would say. This is symbolized in the Pythagorean triangle. It consists of 10 points, inscribed pyramid-like, from 1 to the last 4, within its 3 lines, and it symbolizes the universe in the famous Pythagorean decad. The upper single dot is a monad, and represents a unit point, which is the unity from whence all proceeds, and all is of the same essence with it, while the 10 dots within the triangle represent the phenomenal world. The 3 sides of the equilateral triangle, which enclose the pyramid of dots, are the barriers of noumenal matter, or substance, that separate it from the world of thought. Pythagoras considered a point to correspond in proportion to unity, a line to 2, and superficies to 3, a solid to 4, and he defined a point as a monad having position, and the beginning of all things. A line was thought to correspond with duality because it was produced by the first motion from indivisible nature, and formed the junction of 2 points. A superficies was compared to the number 3, because it is the first of all causes that are found in figures. For a circle, which is the principle of all round figures, comprises a triad in center, space, circumference. But a triangle, which is the first of all rectilineal figures, is included in a ternary, and receives its form according to that number, and was considered by the Pythagoreans to be the creator of all sublunary things. The 4 points at the base of the Pythagorean triangle correspond with a solid or cube, which combines the principles of length, breadth, and thickness, for no solid can have less than 4 extreme boundary points. It is argued that the human mind cannot conceive an indivisible unit short of the annihilation of the idea with its subject. This is an error, as the Pythagoreans have proved, and a number of seers before them, although there is a special training for it, and although the profane mind can hardly grasp it. There are such things as meta-mathematics and meta-geometry. Even mathematics pure and simple proceeded from the universal to the particular, from the mathematical, hence indivisible, point, to solid figures, The teaching originated in India and was taught in Europe by Pythagoras, who, throwing a veil over the circle and the point, which no living man can define except as incomprehensible abstractions, laid the origin of the differentiated cosmic matter in the basic or horizontal line of the triangle. Thus, the latter became the earliest of geometrical figures. The author of New Aspects of Life and of the Kabbalistic Mysteries objects to the objectivization, so to speak, of the Pythagorean conception and use of the equilateral triangle and calls it a misnomer. His argument is that a solid equilateral body, one whose base and each of its sides form equal triangles, must have 4 co-equal sides or surfaces, while a triangular plane will as necessarily possess 5. Demonstrates, on the contrary, the grandeur of the conception in all of its esoteric application to the idea of the pre-Genesis and the genesis of cosmos. Granted that an ideal triangle, depicted by mathematical imaginary lines, can have no sides at all, being simply a phantom of the mind. If sides be imputed to which, they must be the sides of the object it constructively represents. But in such a case, most of the scientific hypotheses are no better than phantoms of the mind. They are unverifiable, except on inference, and have been adopted merely to answer scientific necessities. Furthermore, the ideal triangle, as the abstract idea of a triangular body, and therefore as the type of an abstract idea, accomplished and carried out to perfection the double symbolism intended. As an emblem applicable to the objective idea, the simple triangle became a solid. When repeated in stone on the 4 cardinal points, it assumed the shape of the pyramid, the symbol of the phenomenal merging into the nominal universe of thought. At the apex of the 4 triangles, and as an imaginary figure constructed of 3 mathematical lines, it symbolized the subjective spheres, those lines enclosing a mathematical space which is equal to nothing enclosing nothing. Because, to the senses and the untrained consciousness of profane and scientist, everything beyond the lines of differentiated matter, in example, outside and beyond the realm of even the most spiritual substance, has to remain forever equal to nothing. It is the Ein Sof, the no thing. Yet, these phantoms of the mind are in truth no greater abstractions than the abstract ideas in general upon evolution and physical development, e.g., gravity, matter, force, etc., on which the exact sciences are based. Our most eminent chemists and physicists are earnestly pursuing the not hopeless attempt of finally tracing to its hiding place the protyle, or the basic line of the Pythagorean triangle. The latter is, as said, the grandest conception imaginable, as it symbolizes both the ideal and the visible universes. Footnote. In the world of form, having found its expression in the pyramids, symbolism has in them both a triangle and a square, with their 4 co-equal triangles or surfaces, the 4 basic points, and the 5th, the apex. For if the possible unit is only a possibility as an actuality of nature, as an individual of any kind, and as every individual natural object is capable of division, and by division loses its unity, or ceases to be a unit. Footnote 2 is New Aspects of Life, or ceases to be a unit. It is so only in the realm of exact sciences, in a world as deceptive as it is elusive. In the realm of esoteric sciences, the unit divided ad infinitum, instead of losing its unity, approaches with every division the planes of the only eternal reality. The eyes of the seer can follow and behold it in all its pre-genetic glory. This same idea of the reality of the subjective and the unreality of the objective universes is found at the bottom of the Pythagorean and Platonic teachings, limited to the elect alone. For Porphyry, speaking of the monad and the duad, says that the former only was considered substantial and real, that most simple being, the cause of all unity and the measure of all things. But the duad, although the origin of evil, or matter, thence unreal in philosophy, is still substance during Manvantara, and is often called the third monad in occultism, and the connecting line as between 2 points, or numbers, which proceeded from that, which was before all numbers, as expressed by Rabbi Barahail. And from this duad proceeded all the scintillas of the 3 upper and 4 lower worlds, or planes, which are in constant interaction and correspondence. This is a teaching which the Kabbalah has in common with the Eastern occultism. For in the occult philosophy there are the one cause and the primal cause, which later thus becomes paradoxically the second, as clearly expressed by the author of Kabbalah from the philosophical writings of Ibn Gabriel. In the treatment of the primal cause, 2 things must be considered: the primal cause per se, and the relation and connection of the primal cause with the visible and unseen universe. Thus, he shows the early Hebrews following in the steps of the Oriental philosophy, Chaldean, Persian, Hindu, Arabic, etc. Their primal cause was designated at first by the triadic Shaddai, the triune Almighty, subsequently by the Tetragrammaton, Yahweh, symbol of the past, present, and future, and, let us add, of the eternal Is, or the I Am. Moreover, in the Kabbalah, the name Yahweh, or Jehovah, expresses a he and a she, male and female, 2 in 1, or Chokmah and Bina, and his, or rather their, Shekinah, or synthesizing spirit, grace, which makes again of the duad a triad. This is demonstrated in the Jewish liturgy for Pentecost and the prayer, "In the name of unity of the holy and blessed Hu, he, and his Shekinah, the hidden and concealed Hu, blessed be Yahweh," the quaternary, forever. Ha is said to be masculine and Yah feminine. Together they make the one Yahweh, one, but the male-female nature. The Shekinah is always considered in the Kabbalah as feminine, and so it is considered in the esoteric Puranas, for Shekinah is no more than Sakti, the female double, or lining, of any god, in such case. And so it was with the early Christians, whose Holy Spirit was feminine, as Sophia was with the Gnostics. But in the transcendental Chaldean Kabbalah, or Book of Numbers, Shekinah is sexless and the purest abstraction, a state, like nirvana, not subject or object or anything, except an absolute presence. Thus it is only in the anthropomorphized system, such as the Kabbalah has now greatly become, that Shekinah Sakti is feminine. As such, she becomes the duad of Pythagoras, the 2 straight lines of the symbol that can never meet, which, therefore, form no geometrical figure and are the symbol of matter. Out of this duad, when united in one basic line of the triangle on the lower plane, the upper triangle of the Sephirothal tree, emerge the Elohim, or deity in cosmic nature, with the true Kabbalist, the lowest designation, translated in the Bible, God. See the same work and page. Footnote. Such recent works as the Kabbalah of Mr. Isaac Meyer and of Mr. S.L. McGregor Mathers fully justify our attitude toward the Jehovistic deity. It is not the transcendental, philosophical, and highly metaphysical abstraction of the original Kabbalistic thought, Ein Sof Shekinah Adam Kadmon, and all that follows, that we oppose, but the crystallization of these into the highly unphilosophical, repulsive, and anthropomorphic Jehovah, the androgynous and finite deity for which eternity, omnipotence, and omniscience are claimed. We do not war against the ideal reality, but the hideous theological shadow. Out of these issue the scintillas. The scintillas are the souls, and these souls appear in the threefold form of monads, units, atoms, and gods, according to our teaching. Every atom becomes a visible complex unit, a molecule, and once attracted into the sphere of terrestrial activity, the monadic essence, passing through the mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdoms, becomes man. The esoteric catechism. Again, God, monad, and atom are the correspondences of mind, spirit, mind, and body. Atma, manas, and satula sarira in man. In their septenary aggregation, they are the heavenly man, see Kabbalah for the later term. Thus, terrestrial man is the provisional reflection of the heavenly. The monads, yivas, are the souls of the atoms. Both are the fabric in which the Kohans, Dhyanis, gods, clothe themselves when form is needed. Okay, so here we're going to have to talk about one more thing, at least, right? Atoms are not monads. They are at least a triangle. You have a proton, like let's just take helium, right? You have one proton, one neutron, one electron. That's 3 points. Not one. It is contained in a single unit, yes, but it is 3 in 1. You can find the duad as the nucleus, or you can find the duad as the nucleus and the electron, but there are 3 provisions inside of that, right? We're not getting into quarks, and we're not getting into the deep theoreticals. These are things we can see. We have electron microscopes. We can see the electrons. We see the arrangement. We see how they align. And it is a triangle, right? You have the base, which is the nucleus, and you have the point above, which is the electron, just using helium. Now, let's bring it up to hydrogen. We have 2, 2, and 2. That's this. Okay? And then we have 3, which was 3, 3, and 3. 3, 6, 9. That's going to be this turned on its side. Like, at no point are they monads, right? They are a single unit in the same way that I am a single unit, right? I am a human, but I am made up of carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, and oxygen, all of the elements. And on top of that, I have biotics in my stomach digesting my food. I have different biotics on my skin eating bacteria, which is another biotic, right? And so, as a single unit, I am many things. The only single unit, the only monad, is going to be the understanding that there is. From nothing comes something. That is going to be 1. But once there is actually a something, it's going to be at least 2, probably 3. Sorry. All right. This relates to cosmic and subplanetary monads, not to the supercosmic monas, the Pythagorean monad as called, in its synthetic character, by the pantheistical peripatetics. The monads of the present dissertation are treated from the standpoint of their individuality, as atomic souls. And I will grant this, right? I will say, okay, single unit, right? Like we just talked about with the body. So if you are conceptualizing the atoms with no understanding that there are 3 components, then you can see that as a 1, right? That's understandable. Looking through the history, looking back with the lens of history, understanding through science, we can see where this mistake was made. But it was still a mistake. The monads in the present or the atomic souls, before these atoms descend into pure terrestrial form. No, the atoms are here in their pure terrestrial form, right? The first plane of existence, according to me, is the atomic one, which is each individualized atom as part of the Holy Spirit, acting in its accordance with its own nature, right? Now, that can be 2 hydrogens and an oxygen floating free form together, and then there's an ionic bond initiated, which forms a molecule. But as the individual, they're there. They are all around you right now. There is oxygen, both 1, 2, and 3, surrounding you right now. O1 is deadly. O2 keeps you alive. O3 protects the planet. All three of them are right now around you, but they are just representations. And so they are here, they are incorporated, they are performing their duties. Now, whether it is an intelligence or not is up for debate. I don't necessarily believe that it's an intelligence like we have, because part of what makes us different is that we increase in intelligence as we come up the ladder, up the evolutionary chain of spiritual evolution. As we go from the individual atom into the plant, we get a little bit more cognition. Not a whole lot, but plants feel pain. They communicate between each other. That happens. The third plane of existence is the simple animals. They get a better understanding. The fourth plane of existence is the greater animals. They get a better understanding than that. And then there's us, and we have a better understanding than all of them. And then there's the next one who has a better understanding than we do. Back to the text. The point being that the atomic is here. It is in terrestrial, right? It is not in some idealized space, but here, right now. The idealized version. For this descent into concrete matter marks the medial point of their own individual pilgrimage. So you can track that, I guess. Like, if you can find the medial, then you know where the origin is. You not only know where the origin is, but you know where the termination point is. That's how you find the medial. Do you think she tracked an individual atom from beginning to end? I doubt it highly. Their own individual pilgrimage. Here, losing in the mineral kingdom their individuality, they begin to ascend through the 7 states of terrestrial evolution to that point where a correspondence is firmly established between the human and Deva, divine consciousness. Now, this is not so very far removed from what I believe. I have 7 stages of evolution on the material plane, with the 8th being the return to the source from which 0 was. At present, however, we are not concerned with their terrestrial metamorphoses and tribulations, but with their life and behavior in space, on planes wherein the eye of the most intuitional chemist and physicist cannot reach them, unless, indeed, he develops in himself highly clairvoyant faculties. It is well known that Leibniz came several times very near the truth, but defined monadic evolution incorrectly, which is not only to be wondered at, since he was not an initiate, nor even a mystic, only a very intuitional philosopher. Yet no psychophysicist ever came nearer than he has to the esoteric general outline of evolution. This evolution, viewed from its several standpoints, an example as the universal and the individualized monad, and the chief aspects of the evolving energy, after differentiation, the purely spiritual, the intellectual, the psychic, and the physical, may be thus formulated as an invariable law, a descent of spirit into matter, equivalent to an ascent into physical evolution. A reascent from the depths of materiality towards its status quo ante, with a corresponding dissipation of concrete form and substance up to the laya state, or what science calls the 0 point, and beyond. These states, once the spirit of esoteric philosophy is grasped, become absolutely necessary from a simple logical and analogical considerations. Physical science having now ascertained, through its department of chemistry, the invariable law of this evolution of atoms, from their protylene state down to that of the physical and then a chemical particle, or molecule, cannot well reject the same as a general law. And once it is forced by its enemies, metaphysics and psychology, footnote, let not the word psychology cause the reader to carry his thought by an association of ideas to modern psychologists, so-called, whose idealism is another name for uncompromising materialism, and whose pretended monism is no better than a mask to conceal the void of final annihilation, even of consciousness. Here, spiritual psychology is meant. Metaphysics and psychology, out of its alleged impregnable strongholds, it will find it more difficult than it now appears to refuse room in the spaces of space to planetary spirits, gods, elementals, and even elementary spooks or ghosts and others. Already, Figier and Paul Diacia, two positivists and materialists, have succumbed before this logical necessity. Other and still greater scientists will follow in that intellectual fall. Never happened. They will be driven out of their position not by spiritual, theosophical, or any other physical or even mental phenomena, but simply by the enormous gaps and chasms that open daily and will still be opening before them, as one discovery follows the other, until they are finally knocked off of their feet by the ninth wave of simple common sense. Here is an example. Professor W. Crookes' latest discovery of what he has named protyle in the Notes on the Bhagavad Gita by one of the best metaphysicians and Vedantic scholars in India. Footnote 2. T. Subbaro, see Theosophist. Vedantic scholars in India. The lecturer, referring cautiously to things occult in that great Indian esoteric work, makes a remark as suggestive as it is strictly correct. Into the details of the evolution of the solar system itself, he says, it is not necessary for me to enter. You may gather some idea as to the way in which the various elements thought into existence from these three principles into which Mula Prakriti is differentiated, the Pythagorean triangle, by examining the lecture delivered by Professor Crookes a short time ago upon the so-called elements of modern chemistry. This lecture will give you some idea of the way in which these elements spring from Vishwanara. Footnote. Vishwanara is not merely the manifested objective world, but the one physical basis, the horizontal line of the triangle, from which the whole objective world starts into existence. And this is the cosmic duad, the androgynous substance. Beyond only is the true protyle, in which these elements spring from Vishwanara, the most objective of these three principles, which seems to stand in the place of the protyle mentioned in that lecture. Except in a few particulars, this lecture seems to give the outlines of the theory of physical evolution on the plane of Vishwanara, and is, so far as I know, the nearest approach made by modern investigators to the real occult theory on the subject. These words will be re-echoed and approved by every Eastern occultist. Much from the lectures by Professor Crookes has already been quoted in Section 12 of these addenda. Since then, there has been another lecture delivered, as remarkable as the first one, on the genesis of the elements. Footnote 2. By W. Crookes, FRS, VPCS, delivered at the Royal Institution, London. And also a third one. Here, we have almost a corroboration of the teachings of esoteric philosophy concerning the mode of primeval evolution. It is, indeed, as near an approach made by a great scholar and specialist in chemistry. Footnote 3. How true it is will be fully demonstrated only on that day when his discovery of radiant matter will have resulted in a further elucidation with regard to the true source of light, and revolutionized all the present speculations. Further familiarity with the northern streamers of the aurora borealis may help the recognition of this truth. Made by a great scholar and specialist in chemistry to the secret doctrine, as could be made apart from the application of the monads and atoms of the dogmas of purely transcendental metaphysics, and their connection and correlation with God's and intelligent conscious monads. But chemistry is now on its ascending plane, thanks to one of its highest European representatives. It is impossible for it to go back to that day when materialism regarded its sub-elements as absolutely simple and homogeneous bodies, which it had raised in its blindness to the rank of elements. The mask has been snatched off by too clever a hand for there to be any fear of a new disguise. After years of pseudology, of bastard molecules parading under the name of elements, behind and beyond which there could be naught but a void, a great professor of chemistry asked once more, "What are these elements? Whence do they come? What is their signification? These elements perplex us in our researches, baffle us in our speculations, and haunt us in our very dreams. They stretch like an unknown sea before us, mocking, mystifying, and murmuring strange revelations and possibilities." Those who are heirs to primeval revelations have taught these possibilities in every century, but have never found a fair hearing. The truths inspired to Kepler, Leibniz, Gassendi, Swedenborg, etc., were ever alloyed with their own speculations in one or another predetermined direction, hence distorted. But now one of the great truths has dawned upon an eminent professor of modern exact science, and he fearlessly proclaims as a fundamental axiom that science has not made itself acquainted, so far, with real simple elements. For Professor Crookes tells his audience, "If I venture to say that our commonly received elements are not simple and primordial, that they have not arisen by chance, or have not been created in a desultory and mechanical manner, but have evolved from simpler matters, or perhaps indeed from one sole kind of matter, I do but give formal utterance to an idea which has been, so to speak, for some time in the air of science. Chemists, physicists, philosophers of the highest merit declare explicitly their belief that these 70, or thereabouts, elements of our textbooks are not the pillars of Hercules which we must never hope to pass. Philosophers, in the present as in the past, men who certainly have not worked in a laboratory, have reached the same view from another side." Thus, Mr. Herbert Spencer records his conviction that the chemical atoms are produced from the true or physical atoms by processes of evolution under conditions which chemistry has not yet been able to produce. And the poet has forestalled the philosopher. Milton, Paradise Lost, Book 5, makes the archangel Raphael say to Adam, instinct with the evolutionary idea, that the Almighty had created one first matter, all endued with various forms, various degrees of substance. All right, to me, this is the Holy Spirit, right? The one matter being all of the elementals in raw form at the exact same time, right? Zero molecules, no combinations of ionics whatsoever. Each individualized atom of element separate in itself. That is the one first matter. Ionization, the application of the energetic side of force, creates the molecules from the atoms. This is something that is fairly indisputable, right? You can say that prior to corporation that there was some other primeval matter from which atoms came. We can't prove that. We will probably never be able to prove that. And until it is a proven thing, it is going to remain in the realm of speculation. Nevertheless, the idea would have remained crystallized in the air of science and never have descended into the thick atmosphere of materialism and profane mortals for years to come, perhaps, had not Professor Crookes bravely and fearlessly reduced it to its simple elements, and thus publicly forced it on scientific notice. An idea, says Plutarch, is a being incorporeal which has no subsistence by itself, but gives figure and form unto shapeless matter, and becomes the cause of the manifestation. De Placide Philos. The revolution produced in old chemistry books by Avogadro was the first page in the volume of New Chemistry. Mr. Crookes has now turned the second page and is boldly pointing to what may be the last. For once protyle is accepted and recognized, as invisible ether was, both being logical and scientific necessities, chemistry will have virtually ceased to live. It will reappear in its reincarnation as new alchemy or metachemistry. Once again, one of those things that never happened. The discoverer of radiant matter will have vindicated in time the archaic Aryan works on occultism and even the Vedas and Puranas. For what are the manifested mother, the father-son husband, Aditi and Daksha, a form of Brahma, as creators, and the son, the three firstborn, but simply hydrogen, oxygen, and that which in its terrestrial manifestation is called nitrogen. But even the exoteric descriptions of firstborn triad give all the characteristics of these three gases. Priestley, the discoverer of oxygen, or that which was known in the highest antiquity. That's not the first three. That's not the first three. You're missing some. Yet, all the ancient, medieval, and modern poets and philosophers have been anticipated, even in the exoteric Hindu books. Descartes' plenum of matter differentiated into particles, Leibniz's ethereal fluid, and Kant's primitive fluid dissolved into its elements. That would all be the Holy Spirit, the plasma. Kepler's solar vortex and systemic vortices, in short, from the elemental vortices inaugurated by the universal mind, through Anaxagoras down to Galileo, Torricelli, and Swedenborg, and after them to the latest speculations by European mystics. All this is found in the Hindu hymns and mantras to the gods, monads, and atoms in their fullness, for they are inseparable. In esoteric teachings, the most transcendental conceptions of the universe and its mysteries, as the most, seemingly, materialistic speculations, are found reconciled, because those sciences embrace the whole scope of evolution from spirit to matter, as declared by an American theosophist. The monads of Leibniz may from one point of view be called force, from another matter. To occult science, force and matter are only two sides of the same substance. Let the reader remember these monads of Leibniz, every one of which is a living mirror of the universe, every monad reflecting every other, and compare this view and definition with certain Sanskrit stanzas, slokas, translated by Sir William Jones, in which it is said that the creative source of the divine mind, hidden in a veil of thick darkness, formed mirrors of the atoms of the world, and cast reflection from its own face on every atom. When, therefore, Professor Crookes declares that if we can show how the so-called chemical elements might have been generated, we shall be able to fill up a formidable gap in our knowledge of the universe, the answer is ready. The theoretical knowledge is contained in the esoteric meaning of every Hindu cosmogony in the Puranas. The practical demonstration thereof is in the hands of those who will not be recognized in this century, save by the very few. The scientific possibilities of various discoveries that must inexorably lead exact science into the acceptation of Eastern occult views, which contain all the requisite material for the filling of those gaps, are, so far, at the mercy of modern materialism. It is only by working in the direction taken by Professor Crookes that there is any hope for the recognition of a few hitherto occult truths. Meanwhile, one thirsting to have a glimpse at a practical diagram of the evolution of primordial matter, which, separating and differentiating under the impulse of cyclic law, divides itself into a septenary gradation of substance, from a general view, can do no better than to examine the plates attached to Mr. Crookes's lecture, Genesis of the Elements, and ponder well over some passages of the text. In one place, page 11, he says, "Our notions of a chemical element have expanded, Hitherto, the molecule has been regarded as an aggregate of two or more atoms, and no account has been taken of the architectural design on which these atoms have been joined. We may consider that the structure of a chemical element is more complicated than it has hitherto been supposed. Between the molecules we are accustomed to deal with in chemical reactions, and ultimate atoms as first created, come smaller molecules or aggregates of physical atoms. Then sub-molecules differ from one from the other according to the position they occupied in the yttrium edifice. Perhaps this hypothesis can be simplified if we imagine yttrium as to be represented by a 5-shilling piece. By chemical fractionation, I have divided it into 5 separate shillings, and find that these shillings are not counterparts, but like carbon atoms in the benzoyl ring, have the impress of their positions, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 stamped on them. If I throw my shillings into the melting pot, or dissolve them chemically, the mint stamp disappears, and they all turn out to be silver. This will be the case with all the atoms and molecules when they have been separated from their compound forms and bodies. Wrong. Unless you are breaking it down into individualized electron, neutron, proton, right? And then you can say this, right? Then you can say that, yes, they are all comprised of the exact same thing, which is electromagnetics, by the way. They are held in their particular form by electromagnetics. They are bonded into molecules by electromagnetics. They are formed into complex compounds by electromagnetics. When separated from their compound forms and bodies, when pralaya sets in, reverse the case and imagine the dawn of a new manvantara. The pure silver of the absorbed material will once more separate into substance, which will generate divine essences, whose principles, footnote, corresponding on the cosmic scale with the spirit, soul, mind, life, and the 3 vehicles, the astral, the mayavic, and the physical bodies of mankind, whatever division is made. Divine essences whose principles are the primary elements, the sub-elements, the physical energies and subjective and objective matter, or, as these are epitomized, gods, monads, and atoms. If leaving for one moment the metaphysical or transcendental side of the question, dropping out of the present consideration the supersensuous and intelligent beings and entities believed in by the Kabbalists and Christians, we turn to the atomical theory of evolution. The occult teachings are still found corroborated by exact science and its confessions, as far at least as regards the supposed simple elements, now suddenly degraded into poor and distant relatives, not even second cousins to the latter. For we are told by Professor Crookes that hitherto it has been considered that if atomic weight of a metal, determined by different observers setting out from different compounds, was always found to be constant, then such metal must rightly take rank among the simple or elementary bodies. We learn that this is no longer the case. Wrong. Again, we have here wheels within wheels. Gadolinium is not an element but a compound. We have shown that yttrium is a complex of 5 or more new constituents. And who shall venture to gainsay that each of these constituents, if attacked in some different matter, and if the result was submitted to a test more delicate and searching than the radiant matter test, might not be still further divisible? Where, then, is the actual, ultimate element? As we advance, it recedes like the tantalizing mirage lakes and groves seen by the tired and thirsty traveler in the desert. And we, in our quest for truth, to be thus deluded and balked? The very idea of an element as something absolutely primary and ultimate seems to be growing less and less distinct. And yet, 30 years later, it would be proven. On page 429 of Isis Unveiled, Volume 1, we said that the mystery of first creation, which was ever the despair of science, is unfathomable unless they, the scientists, accept the doctrine of Hermes. they will have to follow in the footsteps of the Hermetists. Our prophecy begins to assert itself. But between Hermes and Huxley there is a middle course and point. Let the men of science only throw a bridge halfway and think seriously over the theories of Leibniz. We have shown our theories with regard to atomic evolution, their last formation into chemical compound molecules being produced within our terrestrial workshops in the Earth's atmosphere and not elsewhere, wrong, as strangely agreeing with the evolution of atoms shown in Mr. Crookes' plates. He was wrong too. Several times already it was stated in this volume that Martatanda, the sun, had evolved and aggregated, together with his smaller 7 brothers, from his mother's, Aditi's, bosom, that bosom being prima materia, the lecturer's primordial protyle. Esoteric doctrines teach the existence of an antecedent form of energy having periodic cycles of ebb and swell, rest and activity, and behold, a great scholar in science now asking the world to accept this as one of the postulates. We have shown the mother, fiery and hot, becoming gradually cool and radiant, and that same scientist claims, as his second postulate, a scientific necessity, it would seem, an eternal action akin to cooling, operating slowly in the protyle. Occult science teaches that mother lies stretched in infinity during pralaya as the great deep, the dry waters of space, according to the quaint expression in the Catechism, and becomes wet only after the separation and moving over its face of Narayana, the spirit which is invisible flame, which never burns but sets on fire all that it touches and gives it life and generation. Footnote. The Lord is a consuming fire, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. That's an odd footnote. And now science tells us that the firstborn element, most nearly allied to protyle, would be hydrogen, which for some time would be the only existing form of matter in the universe. What says old science? It answers just so. But we would call hydrogen and oxygen, which instills the fire of life into the mother by incubation, in the pre-genetic and even pre-geological ages, the spirit. The noumenon of that which becomes in its grossest form oxygen and hydrogen and nitrogen on earth. Nitrogen being of no divine origin, but merely an earth-born cement to unite other gases and fluids and serve as a sponge to carry itself the breath of life. Pure air. Nitrogen carries pure air, huh? That's fucking hilarious. Footnote 2, which if separated out chemically would yield the spirit of life and its elixir. So, if you can separate nitrogen into a purer form, you'll get the elixir of life, eh? Is that what happens? Gotcha. See the lens of history? See the lens of science? See why you keep things in speculation? Because we know that hydrogen is not the first. It is helium, right? We know. And so, before these gases and fluids become what they are in our atmosphere, they are interstellar ether, still earlier and on a deeper plane, something else, and so on in infinitum. Like, this is going to make me have to break out my periodic table and look at it. It has been a very long time since I took organic chemistry. That was in like 2006. So I am rusty. It has been a very long time. It is entirely possible that I'm mixing up helium and hydrogen, although I don't think I am. I'm pretty sure helium is 1 and hydrogen is 2. So I'm going to have to break it out and go through it because this is wild. The eminent and learned gentleman must pardon an occultist for quoting him at such length, but such is the penalty of a fellow of the Royal Society who approaches so near the precincts of the sacred item of occult mysteries as virtually to overstep the forbidden boundaries. I wish somebody was calling me out like that. Come on, bring it. Bring me the heat. But it is time to leave modern physical science and turn to the psychological and metaphysical side of the question. We would only remark that, to the two very reasonable postulates required by the eminent lecturer, to get a glimpse of some few of the secrets so darkly hidden behind the door of the unknown, a third should be added. Footnote 3. Foremost of all, the postulate that there is no such thing in nature as inorganic substances or bodies. Stones, minerals, rocks, and even chemical atoms are simply organic units in profound lethargy. Their coma has an end, and their inertia becomes activity. A third should be added, lest no battering at it should avail. The postulate that Leibniz in his speculations stood on a firm groundwork of fact and truth. The admirable and thoughtful synopsis of these speculations, as given by John Theodore Mertz in his Leibniz, shows how nearly he has brushed the hidden secrets of the esoteric theogony in his monadology. And yet, that philosopher has hardly risen in his speculations above the first planes, the lower planes of the cosmic great body. His theory soars to no loftier heights than those of manifested life, self-consciousness, and intelligence, leaving the regions of the earlier post-genetic mysteries untouched, and his ethereal fluid is post-planetary. But his third postulate will hardly be accepted by the modern men of science, and, like Descartes, they will prefer keeping to the properties of external things, which, like extension, are incapable of explaining the phenomena of motion, rather than accept the latter as an independent force. They will never become anti-Cartesian in this generation, nor will they admit that the property of inertia is not a purely geometrical property, that it points to the existence of something in external bodies which is not extension merely. This is Leibniz's idea as analyzed by Mertz, who adds that he called this something force, and maintained that external things were endowed with force, and that, in order to be the bearers of this force, they must have a substance. For they are not lifeless and inert masses, but the centers and bearers of form, a purely esoteric claim, since force was with Leibniz an active principle, the division between mind and matter disappearing by this conclusion. But the mathematical and dynamical inquiries of Leibniz would not have led to the same result in the mind of a purely scientific inquirer. But Leibniz was not the scientific man in the modern sense of the word. Had he been so, he might have worked out the conception of energy, defined mathematically the ideas of force and mechanical work, and arrived at the conclusion that, even for purely scientific purposes, it is desirable to look upon force, not as a primary quantity, but as a quantity derived from some other value. But, luckily for truth, Leibniz was a philosopher, and as such he had certain primary principles which biased him in favor of certain conclusions, and his discovery that external things were substances endowed with force was at once used for the purpose of applying these principles. One of these principles was the law of continuity, the conviction that all of the world was connected, that there were no gaps and chasms which could not be bridged over. The contrast of extended thinking substances were unbearable to him. The definition of the extended substance had already become untenable. It was natural that a similar inquiry was made into the definition of mind, the thinking substance. The divisions made by Leibniz, however incomplete and faulty from the standpoint of occultism, show a spirit of metaphysical intuition to which no man of science, not Descartes, not even Kant, has ever reached. With him, there existed ever an infinite gradation of thought. Only a small portion of the contents of our thoughts, he said, rises into the clearness of apperception, into the light of perfect consciousness. Many remain in a confused or obscure state, in the state of perceptions. But they are there. Descartes denied soul to the animal. Leibniz endowed, as the occultists do, the whole creation with mental life, this being, according to him, capable of infinite gradations, and this, as Mertz justly observes, at once widened the realm of mental life, destroying the contrast of animate and inanimate matter. It did yet more, it reacted on the conception of matter, of the extended substance, for it became evident that external or material things presented the property of extension to our senses only, not to our thinking faculties. The mathematician, in order to calculate geometrical figures, had been obliged to divide them into an infinite number of infinitely small parts, and the physicist saw no limit to the divisibility of matter into atoms. The bulk through which external things seem to fill space was a property which they acquired only through the coarseness of our senses. Leibniz followed these arguments to some extent, but he could not rest content in assuming the matter was composed of a finite number of very small parts. His mathematical mind forced him to carry out the argument in infinitum. And what became of the atoms then? They lost their extension and were retained only their property of resistance. They were the centers of force. They were reduced to mathematical points, but if their extension in space was nothing, so much fuller was their inner life. Assuming that inner existence, such as that of the human mind, is a new dimension, not a geometrical, but a metaphysical dimension, having reduced the geometrical extension of the atoms to nothing. Leibniz endowed them with an infinite extension in the direction of their metaphysical direction, after having lost sight of them in the world of space. The mind has, as it were, to dive into a metaphysical world to find and grasp the real essence of what appears in space merely as a mathematical point. As a cone stands on its point, or a perpendicular straight line cuts a horizontal plane only in one mathematical point, but may extend infinitely in height and depth. So the essences of things real, have only a punctual existence in this physical world of space, but have an infinite depth of inner life in the metaphysical world of thought. This is the spirit, the very root of occult doctrine and thought. The spirit matter and matter spirit extend indefinitely in depth, and, like the essence of things of Leibniz, our essence of things real is at the seventh depth, while the unreal and gross matter of science in the external world is at the lowest end of our perceptive senses. The occultist knows the worth or worthlessness of the latter. The student must now be shown the fundamental distinction between the system of Leibniz, footnote, the real spelling of the name, that doesn't need to be in there, the system of Leibniz and that of occult philosophy on the question of the monads, and this may be done with his monadology before us. It may be correctly stated that were Leibniz's and Spinoza's systems reconciled, the essence of spirit of esoteric philosophy would be made to appear. From the shock of the two, as opposed to the Cartesian system, emerged the truths of the archaic doctrine. Both oppose the metaphysics of Descartes. His idea of the contrast of two substances, extension and thought, radically differing from each other and mutually irreducible, was too arbitrary and too unphilosophical for them. Thus, Leibniz made of the two Cartesian substances two attributes of one universal unity, in which he saw God. Spinoza recognized but one universal indivisible substance and absolute all, like Parabrahman. Leibniz, on the contrary, perceived the existence of a plurality of substances. There was but one for Spinoza, for Leibniz an infinitude of beings from and in the one. Hence, though both admitted but one real entity, while Spinoza made it impersonal and indivisible, Leibniz divided his personal deity into a number of divine and semi-divine beings. Spinoza was a subjective, Leibniz an objective pantheist, yet both were great philosophers in their intuitive perceptions. Now, if these two teachings were blended together and each corrected by the other, the foremost of all, the one reality, weeded out of its personality, there would remain as a sum total a true spirit of esoteric philosophy in them. The impersonal, attributeless, absolute divine essence, which is no being, but the root of all being. Draw a deep line in your thought between that ever incognizable essence and the as invisible yet comprehensible presence, Mula Prakriti, or Shekinah, from beyond and through which vibrates the sound of the verbum, and from which evolve the numberless hierarchies of intelligent egos, of conscious as of semi-conscious, perceptive and apperceptive beings, whose essence is spiritual force, whose substance is the elements, and whose bodies, when needed, are the atoms. And our doctrine is there. For, says Leibniz, the primitive element of every material body being force, which has none of the characteristics of objective matter, it can be conceived, but can never be the object of any imaginative representation. That which was for him the primordial and ultimate element in every body and object was thus not the material atoms or molecules, necessarily more or less extended, as those of Epicurus and Gassendi, but, as Mertz shows, immaterial and metaphysical atoms, mathematical points or real souls, as explained by Henri Laclière, Professor agrégé de philosophie, his French biographer. That which exists outside of us in an absolute manner are souls whose essence is force. Monadology Introduction. Thus, reality in the manifested world is composed of a unity of units, so to say, immaterial from our standpoint and infinite. This Leibniz calls monads, Eastern philosophy, yivas, and occultism gives it, with the Kabbalists and all the Christians, a variety of names. I call it the Holy Spirit. It is all the atoms at the exact same time. They are with us, as with Leibniz. The expression of the universe. Footnote. Leibniz's dynamism, says Professor Laclière, would offer but a little difficulty if with him the monad had remained a simple atom of blind force, but one perfectly understands the perplexity of modern materialism. The expression of the universe in every physical point is but a phenomenal expression of the nominal, metaphysical point. His distinction between perception and apperception is the philosophical, though dim, expression of the esoteric teachings. His reduced universes, of which there are as many as there are monads, is the chaotic representation of our septenary system with its divisions and subdivisions. As to the relation his monads bear to our Dayan Kohans, cosmic spirits, devas, and elementals, we may reproduce, briefly, the opinion of a learned and thoughtful theosophist, Mr. H.A. Beauregard, on the subject. In an excellent paper on the elementals, the elementary spirits, and relationship between them and human beings, read by him before the Aryan Theosophical Society of New York, Mr. Beauregard formulates distinctly his opinion. To Spinoza, substance is dead and inactive, but to Leibniz's penetrating mind, everything is living activity and active energy. In holding this view, he comes infinitely nearer the Orient than any other thinker of his day, or after him. That's not a statement that is unverifiable. His discovery that an active energy forms the essence of substance is a principle that places him in direct relationship with the seers of the East. And the lecturer proceeds to show that to Leibniz's atoms and elements are centers of force, or rather, spiritual beings whose very nature is to act. For the elementary, particles are not acting mechanically, but from an internal principle. They are incorporeal spiritual units. Substantial, however, but not immaterial to our sense, inaccessible to all changes from without, and indestructible by any external force. Wrong. Leibniz's monads, as the lecturer, differ from atoms in the following particulars, which are very important for us to remember. Otherwise, we shall not be able to see the difference between elementals and mere matter. Atoms are not distinguished from each other. They are qualitatively alike. Wrong. But one monad differs from every other monad qualitatively, and every one is a peculiar word to itself, closer to the truth. Not so with atoms. They are absolutely alike, quantitatively and qualitatively, and possess no individuality of their own. That is emphatically wrong. Footnote 2. Leibniz was an absolute idealist in maintaining that material atoms are contrary to reason. System Nouveau. For him, matter was a simple representation of the monad, whether human or atomic. Monads, he thought, as we do, are everywhere. Thus the human soul is a monad, and every cell in the human body has its monad, and every cell in animal, vegetable, and even in the so-called inorganic bodies. His atoms are the molecules of modern science. In his monads, those simple atoms that materialistic science takes on faith, though it will never succeed in interviewing them except in imagination. Wrong. The electron magnoscope. The electron microscope. The electron microscope actually did that for us. We were able to see them, which would be interviewing here. But Leibniz is rather contradictory in his views about the monads. He speaks of his metaphysical points and formal atoms, at one time as realities, occupying space, at another as pure spiritual ideas, and then, again, endows them with objectivity and aggregates their positions in their correlations. Wrong way. Wait, where's my... I didn't know it's up here. Again, the atoms, molecules rather, of materialistic philosophy can be considered as extended and divisible, while the monads are mere mathematical points and indivisible. Finally, and this is a point where the monads of Leibniz closely resemble the elementals of mystic philosophy, these monads are representative beings. Every monad reflects the other. Every monad is a living mirror of the universe within its own sphere. And mark this, for upon it depends the power possessed by these monads, and upon this depends the work they can do for us. In mirroring the world, the monads are not mere passive reflective agents, but spontaneously self-active. They produce the images spontaneously, as the soul does a dream. In every monad, therefore, the adept may read everything, even the future. Every monad, or elemental, is a looking glass that can speak. It is at this point that Leibniz's philosophy breaks down. There is no provision made nor any distinction established between the elemental monad and that of a high planetary spirit, or even the human monad or soul. He even goes so far as to sometimes doubt whether God has ever made anything but monads or substances without extension. Examine the Principes de P. Malebranche. He draws a distinction between monads and atoms. Footnote. The atoms of Leibniz have, in truth, nothing but the name in common with the atoms of the Greek materialist or even the molecules of modern science. He calls them formal atoms and compares them to the substantial forms of Aristotle. He draws a distinction between monads and atoms because, as he repeatedly states, bodies with all their qualities are only phenomenal, like the rainbow, corpora omnia cum omnibus qualitatibus suis non sunt alud quam phenomenon bene fundunta et urus. Lettered Father de Bose's Correspondence. But soon after, he finds a provision for this and in substantial correspondence, and a certain metaphysical bond between the monads, vinculum substantiale. Esoteric philosophy, teaching an objective idealism, though it regards the objective universe and all in it as maya, temporary illusion, draws a practical distinction between collective illusion, mahamaya, from the purely metaphysical standpoint, and the objective relations in it between various conscious egos, so long as this illusion lasts. The adept, therefore, may read the future in an elemental monad, but he has to draw for this object a great number of them, as each monad represents only a portion of the kingdom it belongs to. It is not in the object, but in the modification of the cognition of the object, that the monads are limited. They all go confusedly to the infinite, to the all, but they are all limited and distinguished by the degrees of distinct perceptions. Footnote. Leibniz, like Aristotle, calls the created or emanated monads, the elementals issued from cosmic spirits or gods, intellecies, and incorporeal automata. And, as Leibniz explains, all the portions of the universe are distinctly represented in the monads, but some are reflected in one monad, some in another. But a number of monads could represent simultaneously the thoughts of the 2 million inhabitants of Paris. But what say the occult sciences to this, and what do they add? They say that what is called collectively monads by Leibniz, roughly viewed, and leaving every subdivision out of calculation for the present, footnote 2, these 3 rough divisions correspond to spirit, mind, or soul, and body in the human constitution, may be separated into 3 distinct hosts, which, counted from the highest planes, are firstly gods, or conscious spiritual egos, the intelligent architects who work after the plan in the divine mind. Then come the elementals, or monads, who form collectively and unconsciously the grand universal mirrors of everything connected with their respective realms. Lastly, the atoms, or material molecules, which are informed in their turn by their apperceptive monads, just as every cell in a human body is so informed. See the closing pages of Book 1. There are shoals of such informed atoms which, in their turn, inform the molecules, an infinitude of monads or elementals proper, and countless spiritual forces. Monadless, for they are pure incorporealities. Footnote 3. Brother Beauregard, in his lecture, already mentioned, warns his audience not to regard these Sephiroth too much as individualities, but to avoid at the same time seeing them in abstractions. We shall never arrive at the truth, he says, much less the power of associating with those celestials, until we return to the simplicity and fearlessness of the primitive ages, when men mixed freely with the gods, and the gods descended among men and guided them in truth and holiness. There are several designations for angels in the Bible which clearly show that beings like the elementals of the Kabbalah and the monads of Leibniz must be understood by that term rather than that which is commonly understood. They are called morning stars, flaming fires, the mighty ones, and St. Paul sees them in his cosmogonic vision as principalities and powers. Such names as these preclude the idea of personality, and we find ourselves compelled to think of them as impersonal existences, as an influence, a spiritual substance, or conscious force. For they are pure incorporealities except under certain laws, when they assume a form not necessarily human. Whence, the substance that clothes them, the apparent organism they evolve around their centers, the formless arupa radiations, existing in the harmony of the universal will, and being what we term the collective or the aggregate of cosmic will on the plane of the subjective universe. unite together an infinitude of monads, each the mirror of its own universe, and thus individualize, for the time being, an independent mind, omniscient and universal. And by the same process of magnetic aggregation, they create for themselves objective visible bodies out of the interstellar atoms. For atoms and monads, associated or dissociated, simple or complex, are, from the moment of the first differentiation, but the principles, corporeal, psychic, and spiritual, of the gods, themselves the radiations of primordial nature. Thus, to the eye of the seer, the higher planetary powers appear under two aspects: the subjective, as influences, and the objective, as mystic forms, which, under karmic law, become a presence, spirit and matter being one, as repeatedly stated. Spirit is matter on the seventh plane. Matter is spirit on the lowest point of its cyclic activity, and both are Maya. Atoms are called vibrations in occultism and also sound collectively. This does not interfere with Mr. Tyndall's scientific discovery. He traced, on the lower rung of the ladder of monadic being, the whole course of the atmospheric vibrations, and this constitutes the objective part of the process in nature. He has traced and recorded the rapidity of their motion and transmission, the force of their impact, their setting of vibrations in the tympanum, and their transmission of these to the stolithes, etc., etc., till the vibration of the auditory nerve commences, and a new phenomenon now takes place: the subjective side of the process, or the sensation of sound. Does he perceive or see it? No, for his speciality is to discover the behavior of matter. But why should not a psychic see it, a spiritual seer, whose inner eye is opened, and who can see through the veil of matter? The waves and undulations of science are all produced by atoms propelling their molecules into activity from within. Atoms fill the immensity of space, and by their continuous vibration are that motion which keeps the wheels of life perpetually going. It is that inner work that produces the natural phenomena called the correlation of forces. Only at the origin of every such force there stands the conscious guiding noumenon thereof, angel or god, spirit or demon, ruling powers, yet the same. As described by seers, those who can see the motion of the interstellar shoals and follow them in their evolution clairvoyantly, they are dazzling, like specks of virgin snow in radiant sunlight. Their velocity is swifter than thought, quicker than any mortal physical eye could follow, and, as well as can be judged from the tremendous rapidity of their course, the motion is circular. Standing on an open plain, on a mountain summit especially, and gazing into the vast vault above, and the spatial infinitudes around, the whole atmosphere seems ablaze with them, the air soaked through with these dazzling coruscations. At times, the intensity of their motion produces flashes like the northern lights during the aurora borealis. The sight is so marvelous that, as the seer gazes into this inner world, he feels the scintillating points shoot past him. He is filled with awe at the thought of other, still greater mysteries that lie beyond and within this radiant ocean. However imperfect and incomplete this explanation on God's monads and atoms, it is hoped that some students and theosophists at least will feel that there may indeed be close relation between materialistic science and occultism, which is the complement and missing soul of the former. And that is going to bring us to the end of God's monads. What is it called again? Monads. God's monads and atoms. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult topic. I understand I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. It is important to draw distinctions between speculations and reality. It is important to draw the line between ideal and realism. It is important to understand things that are provable and not. many of the things that she believed have been proven to be untrue. Right? We now have a greater understanding of science. We have the lens of history to look back through, and that's a good lens, right? We have scientific developments. We have not only identified the components of the atom, we have identified pretty exclusively what the atoms are. Now, there may still be some to be found, but for the most part, we have found them. Greater understanding is always a better thing, right? It is important to maintain speculation as speculation so that you don't get dismissed when you are being firm in the things that you speak about. Now, many of the things that she believes as impossible are indeed possible. Right? We have split the atom. That is something that we have done, which was not even a concept then, right? And so that does, in a small way, throw a little bit of shade into that being the fundamental, right? If you can split it, then it's not fundamental. But what happened? You took this atom, separated it on a ionic level into two other elements. That's what happened in the nuclear explosions. That's what happens in a nuclear reactor. You are taking this element and energetically divulging it of itself into something else. But it becomes different elements, right? It was an element, and it becomes an element. Through the process of removing some of the neutrons and some of the electrons and some of the protons, something different is created from it. That is an understanding that they did not have at all. There was no conceptualization of splitting the atom. They were just barely getting to the point of understanding that elements exist. Right? This was just before we got the periodic table. It was before we had an electron microscope. It was before we had combustion engines. Right? This was still in the time of steam. There was no flight. Like, we have a lot of things now, looking back through history, that we can look at with a different lens. And we don't necessarily mean to disparage, right? She was doing the best speculation that she could. My main problem is people have taken this for fact, when indeed it was speculation, because she stated that it was fact. Well, it's not. It's something you were speculating upon, and we have proven severe problems with your speculation. That is not to cast ill intention upon Mrs. Blavatsky or anybody that is mentioned in any of these. I believe that she was earnestly and honestly striving to explain, to the best of her understanding, some very complicated things. I'm doing the same thing, and it could be very possible that I am wrong. Right? I try to maintain that. I try to point that out. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a sub. Throw me a comment. If you agree or disagree with anything that was stated here today, drop it in the comment section. And if it is respectful, it gets to remain up. If there is another work you would like to see discussed in the manner that we are doing here, drop that in the comments as well. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks or even a membership. It will be greatly appreciated. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pit Steak. Peace.